Hello, everyone. Welcome to this launch event for the Sundarbans Climate Justice Project. My name is Robert Carnworth. I was until last year a Justice of the UK Supreme Court, and I have for a number of years taken a particular interest in environmental law and in climate change matters. I've also been privileged to visit India on a number of occasions and to speak at events in different parts of the country on those subjects. And I've had enormously benefit from my exchanges with judges of the Indian courts and of the National Green Tribunal. But I haven't, I'm afraid to say, visited the Sundarbans, and it wasn't until in connection with this event that I realized what an important area that is. And it's particularly apposite now to be thinking about it on the day when we begin in Glasgow, the COP26, the climate change conference, which is looking at what the world can do to meet the ever more pressing challenge of climate change. And I don't need to repeat what's been said about the problems and the importance of taking real steps on a global basis to deal with it. There'll be plenty coming out of Glasgow in the coming days to explain the enormity of the problem. What we're hoping is that there will also be coming out of Glasgow real commitments to do something about it and to build on the important basis provided by the Paris Agreement from 2015. But it is particularly apt that while this is going on, we should be thinking about an area which is perhaps one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, of rising sea levels, of rising sea temperatures, and of violent climatic events. And so it's I welcome very much this initiative between King's College Legal Clinic and Doughty Street Chambers in the UK and Jadavpur University and the National University of Juridical Sciences in India. And this is a remarkable collaboration. My purpose is really just to welcome the speakers to this very important event and to wish it well. And I shall be taking a great interest in to see how it develops. But at the moment, I'm simply going to hand over to Sue Willman from the King's College Legal Clinic, who will be showing, first of all, a short video about the area, and then we'll be introducing the other speakers. So thank you very much for your attention, and I wish the project well.
Welcome, everyone. Very excited to be starting this event with a film which I hope may move you as much as it has moved me and those of us who have watched it within the project. It's from Gasaba Island, which is the place that we have actually visited with our students. And I think it will really speak to what we want to talk about today, which is all about bringing home the voices of people who are most affected, who are on the front line of climate change in countries like India and Bangladesh. So you have to give me a moment to work the film, but I will be able to do it shortly. So we're just starting with an acknowledgement. We've extracted the film from a film made by The Atlantic magazine because it seemed to tell exactly the story that we wanted to tell.
তখন আওয়াজটা ঠিক ভাবে একটা আওয়াজ হয়ে থাকে। যে মাটির বাড়ি, টালির ঘর, যদি টালি উড়ে যায় তখন একটু ভয়েসে বাচ্চা নিয়ে কোথায় যাব, কোথায় থাকবো, এটাই তখন টেনশন আছে। আমার একটা ছোট্ট দেওর ছিল, ওই দেওরটা আমি ছিলাম। যখন ঘরের ভিতরে জলটা ঢুকছে, যখন একটা শব্দ হচ্ছে, আমার দেওরটা আমাকে ধরে কান্নাকাটি করছে। মানে ও যখন আমাকে আঁকড়ে ধরে, আমি ওকেও আঁকড়ে ধরে নিয়ে ওই বাড়ি ছেড়ে মানে উপরে বাঁধের উপরে উঠি। আর তখন ঝুপঝুপ করে দেখতে দেখতে চাঁদের দেওয়াল পড়ে গিয়ে ঘরটা এমনিতেই বসে গেল।
Geeta Maiti lives in the Sundarbans on Masuni Island. She is one of 13 million people who call this delta region home. Straddling the border between India and Bangladesh, these low-lying islands are facing rising sea levels that are 3 times the global average. Several islands have already disappeared, and scientists say Masuni could be next. Farming is the social and economic backbone of Masuni Island. But flooding, erratic rainfall, and increasingly severe cyclones have left 70% of Masuni's agricultural land barren. The need to buy the food they once grew is forcing young men to leave the land their families have farmed for generations and migrate to the cities for work. Ramjan was only 13 years old when he left Masuni. Now he lives and works in this room with 4 other tailors, sewing from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day. Ramjan makes barely enough to support his wife, their 2 young children, and his mother back on Masuni. But most families can't afford to leave. The state government is trying to help. They're supplying bricks to some who have lost their homes. They're subsidizing rice in effort to ease food insecurity. And they are building 3 new flood shelters that will help when disasters strike. The state government has built several walls in sections over the past several decades. Some lasted, some did not. But when Cyclone Isla hit in 2009, everything was destroyed. Officials say that all embankments have been restored, but almost a decade after Isla, the wall where Geeta lives is still being built. And the village where Ramjan's family lives has no protection.
मौसनी में अगर एमंगमेंट का अगर काम नहीं हुआ तो मौसनी द्वीप मैंने बाद में जैसा बोलूँ तो 2-5 साल 10 साल के अंदर मौसनी द्वीप द्वीप नहीं रहेगा।
So you're on mute.
So that's the reason we're here today. We want to draw the attention of the world to what's happening in the Sundarbans, but also we're trying to look for solutions. We're trying to bring people together from different disciplines, together with our legal background and the resources of our law students in India and in the UK, to think about how we can provide some kind of access to justice to the people in the Sundarbans, but also thinking about laws and policies that might enable those communities to adapt, mitigate, or in the first place, that we will no longer be engaging in activities like fossil fuel exploration, which cause the emissions which lead to climate change. And we have a panel from India and the UK of people who've all got different perspectives on this issue, but perhaps the most experienced of those people who really has dedicated much of his life to the Sundarbans, to understanding what's happening there, is oceanographer geographer, Professor Tuhin Ghosh from Jadavpur University. It was very important to us right from the beginning of our project, and a great boon to have Professor Ghosh on our team because he knows the communities, he understands the land, and he's been watching what's happening there for the past 20 years. So I'm going to start our panel discussion by asking Professor Ghosh about what he sees as climate justice in the Sundarbans, and just to tell us a bit more about what's happening there, following on from that film. Welcome, Professor Ghosh, over to you.
Thank you, Sue, and thanks to everybody for providing me the platform for talking something about Sundarban. As a point of matter, I am still learning from the Sundarban itself, not yet learned a lot of things, and I'm learning from the people of the Sundarban. So everything is around the people in Sundarban and the vibrant ecology also. So first of all, if you please allow me to point how much attention or justice the Delta got in the country perspective. We all know that the Sundarban forest area is spreading over both in Bangladesh and India with an invisible international boundary. We need passports to cross that boundary, but the tigers not. Yeah. So if we look at the country map of India, we will find that the major rivers are towards the eastern part and the deltas very obvious. While the western part of our country was mostly engaged with trading and business, the eastern part survived on cultivation of fertile land fed by the river water. So the delta areas, negligible percentage of land in terms of our country coverage, were not considered or prioritized due to their less fertile soil, really neglected, and rather gradually emerged as the resource pool for the life under sea. So historically, the deltas are not seriously prioritized piece of land in India and got no justice at all. And the Western Indian people, they were very much engaged with the trading and business part. And the Eastern Indian people, they were providing the food security to the country. So with greater aspirations, people intervened within the river system in the upland, which may brought them more produce in the upland within the river basins. These interventions silently killed number of rivers, which used to pour the water with full of sediments within the delta system, which actually counteract with the rising sea level. For example, the river Ganges, which is the lifeline of the Indian GBM or Indian Sundarban Delta, is no way contribute towards the progression of the delta. On the other hand, if you see in the map, satellite images, in Bangladesh GBM, there is definite progression created by the sediment flux from the river Meghna. So in the same delta in the GBM, the eastern part is progressing and the western part is degrading. Why? That's a big question. So the rivers from the upland is really important matter in this aspect. And in the Indian Sundarban, as a delta, in our governance, we need to think about it's unlike Bangladesh Sundarban. The Bangladesh Sundarban forest area is not inhabited, but in the Indian Sundarban forest area, there are a lot of people. So according to the 2011 census, that is around 4.4 million people living there. It's around 4.8 million now, according to the growth rate. The new census report we need to get. So as a delta in our governance, the Indian Sundarban got exactly the same treatment, same governance, and shrunk gradually. The rivers, important rivers like Shaptamukhi, Thakuran, all those rivers are not really rivers nowadays. Those are really acting like a tidal creek because they are not getting enough water from the upland. And the rivers are widening to accommodate its shallowing river beds due to higher rate of siltation caused by the reduced flow velocity. The widening of rivers is resultant factor of the riverbank erosion, habitat loss, and displacement. Now, the displaced people are being defined as either climate refugee or environmental refugee, whatever. As the changing climate plays a crucial role with the increasing sea level, this is happening throughout the delta with varying scale. We have enough documentation about that. So I was talking about Goshaba region. We have a lot of people, I know a lot of people who are already displaced. We know in the Sagar Island, there are a lot of displacement in Namkhana, in Pathar Pratima, in Kultoli. We know a lot of people who are displaced. So the people being displaced are experiencing both the government action and inaction, as there is no specific policy or law for the compensation or package for build back better. The supports they have received are not uniform in character, varied through time and space, depending on the initiatives from the local government, sometimes by the local person representative. The government housing scheme for the poor people needs to comply with the rule that the applicant must have a piece of land to construct his house. Fine. But the people are losing their house and land. They cannot really comply with that scheme. So there is a gap in the specific scheme for the poorer people. So in my experience and understanding, the injustice is historical, traditional, and deeply rooted within the system, started from the delta system and further down to the delta people. So whoever responsible for this kind of displacement and losing their land or habitat, people are not really very keen to have that kind of justice. They rather go towards the fatalism. So there is God. God will save us. They don't have any expectation. Almost, we have done some survey, and around 73% people, they used to say that there is no governance, nothing. We don't know what will happen, and probably the God will save us. So that is a train towards the fatalism. So we need to know who is responsible. We need to act against them to achieve the climate justice for the people of the Sundarban, as designed by King's College London. So we are very happy to share our experience, and we will be happy to involve in this project. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tuhin, and thank you for speaking so concisely. I know there are a lot of questions I'd like to ask you, and we would like to hear more from you. But I think this leads neatly into Krishnendu Mukherjee's part of the panel discussion. Krishnendu is kind of the brains behind the operation. He's a barrister at Doughty Street Chambers in London, and he was inspired by reading Professor Ghosh's, one of his early environmental reports, to look at it from a lawyer's perspective, and in particular from an immigration lawyer's perspective, to link up the climate change to the climate migration, where we see people forced into garment factories in cities like Calcutta, as we saw in the film. So we're going to now add to the chat our report, which you could have a look at afterwards. But can I hand over to Krishnendu? Just if you can talk a bit about the idea behind the project, Krishnendu, and what role you think that the law has to play and that lawyers like us have to play in enabling communities to achieve climate justice.
Yes, thanks, Sue, and thank you everyone for attending and participating and showing your support. As a background, I first came to know about the catastrophic effects of global warming in the Indian Sundarbans in 2008 because of an article in the independent newspaper. The article reported the first inhabited island to be completely submerged because of global warming was Lohachor Island, which produced some 10,000 climate refugees. The article was based on a study by Jadavpur University over a 14-year period, much of it may be Tuhin's work, Tuhin's PhD, I think, that found an increase in surface air temperature, sea level rise, and rates of coastal erosion. This then led to a visit in 2008, where I interviewed displaced climate refugees, and an article later in the same year, inspired by a novel by Tuhin Ghosh entitled A Hungry Tide, the legal response to climate adaptation and reparation. The conclusion of the article was that the international, national, and regional level legal response was wholly inadequate, and that if it did not improve, there would be further displacement and loss of livelihood. The article didn't even contemplate any non-state or business response. As an aside, when I went in 2008, many parts of the Sundarbans didn't even have mains electricity, with one of the killers being snake bite, as people stepped on snakes in the pitch dark. Fast forward 12 years, and whilst our project has found that some of the worst predictions that were made in the article about the displacement of people in 2020 have thankfully not been realized, the situation in relation to other parameters, such as the intensity of cyclones, the destruction of livelihoods, migration, forced labor, debt, trafficking, and yesterday I found by speaking to Mr. Halder that there was organ trafficking as well as sex trafficking and other trafficking, which I wasn't aware of, and forced marriage have become far more apparent, and that is obviously one of the objectives of the project, is to find out more about what exactly is going on. Unfortunately, the legal response remains, as we found out, ad hoc and partial, normally in the guise of disaster management. And the question then arises is, when does climate change not become a disaster? When does it become something that nation states and companies should look on as a continuous problem that needs solving? The problem of the people of the Sundarbans and those affected by the effects of global warming require better. And in the area of building back better, this requires, in our view, a transnational, collaborative, decolonized state and non-state response focused on the real worlds of climate-affected people. So in this regard, the Sundarbans Climate Justice Project has several objectives. One, to highlight how the lack of systematic legal response is endangering carbon sinks such as the Sundarbans. And we all know that the Sundarbans is one of the largest mangrove forests in the world and an important carbon sink. Two, to highlight the opaque and diffuse human rights violations that arise due to sustained effects of global warming. Three, to showcase how North-South partnerships of this type need to be formed in order to provide a continuous assessment of these violations, and more importantly, an access to justice for those affected by global warming. Four, to promote research, knowledge exchange, and training within and outside the partnerships. And five, to file litigation and non-judicial complaints by affected people to strengthen the state's duty to protect and the business's duty to respect human rights and provide a remedy, the United Nations guiding principles. And as we all know, there are often industrial projects, it's one of the main calls for COP26, which have local and global effects. As a project, we ultimately aim to set up legal aid hubs as a mechanism by which those facing climate-induced violations can try and obtain redress, a store of data and knowledge, and a flagship in the principles of the rule of law, access to justice, and environmental democracy that underpin the project. We believe that their concerns, the people of the Sundarbans, have just as much right to be heard and remedies as those with greater power and influence. We feel how the world responds to the plight of the vulnerable people in the Sundarbans and those like them across the world is a litmus test for how the world responds to global warming. So ultimately, in response to Sue's questions of what role does a law play in this, we found that the law so far has been very ad hoc and poor, and that lawyers need to interact with strengthening the law, especially the obligations of local states and of businesses that are setting up projects in those areas and outside the areas. Of course, a project of this is never easy, and we've had to overcome the problems of a global pandemic, cyclones, and state elections in West Bengal. But we've made some important progress, and it already feels like a contribution to climate justice. But as a global society, we need to progress, and we need it fast. And I recall the conclusion of my 2008 article. The noise around publicizing and campaigning on issues can often drown out the quiet footfalls which illuminate an issue and reveal its full form. The footfall of the Sundarbans needs to be heard. The hungry tide awaits. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishnendu. I suppose our event today is a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. And the next part of the puzzle, a very important part, is to hear from Dr. Palash Halder, who is himself a former resident of the Sundarbans, but not just because he's a resident, also because his background is in geology. And as I said at the beginning, obviously one of the major contributors to climate change are fossil fuel exploration and exploitation. So there we see a link between the boats that are coming down the Ganges to go to coal plants in Bangladesh and what's happening in the Sundarbans as on a global level, sea levels are rising. So Dr. Halder, thank you very much for joining us. Interested to hear from you about what solutions you'd like to see to address the effects of climate change on residents in the Sundarbans.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I am Dr. Palash Halder, working Geological Survey of India. Now I am retired man and working about publishing journal and chief editor of Samal like this magazine. So and working about people of Sundarban. My own house, original house, is Chubli Jhara, interior of the South Sundarban. Moipit Chubli Jhara, ekdom interior Sundarban. So I am saying about the issues of Sundarban, which climatic change, about climatic change and its remedy. Thank you. The chemical murder of river, island, and forest is leading the destruction of Sundarban. Imposition of dams in the heart of the river, practice and pisciculture, and construction of brick fields alongside the river beds disrupt the flow of the river. There are total 260 islands in Sundarban, and 100 islands out of total number was evicted, including the flora and fauna. This destruction internally caused the upliftment of riverbed and seabed. So, human intervention can be highlighted as a major issue of climatic change in Sundarban. These climatic changes cause constant disruption, depression in Bay of Bengal since 1595 to 2021. For that reason, cyclone hits every year in and tidal waves wash out the land. One such devastating scenario of Sundarban was penned in Hungry Tide by Tuhin Ghosh and also recorded in Aini Akbari. Wetlands in lifeline of Sundarban, but these wetlands like Sundarban, Ramshor wetland, Chatakbil are gradually covered up with ongoing urbanization, which cut a fair amount of oxygen supply in Kolkata, Bangladesh, and West Bengal and Sundarban area. Balanced chemical composition of soil is significant for certain type of plants, but in recent years, the salinity of soil increased in such a level that some plants like Sundari, Gewa, Goran, Kevra, Gorjon got extincted in Sundarban. The concentration of salt also increased in water bodies of Sundarban, and in effect of it, fishes like bogo, nadosh, noyana, shortputi, chang, red crab, muruli, and gangetic dolphin got extinct. And one crop land also failed to regain its fertility. Reckless tourist and innumerable refugees creating a mass in the land behind the mask of tourists, and those unemployed refugees involved in human trafficking like sex slave, drug selling, bonded labor, and also organ trading. There should be a card like passport. So there should be a card like passport to enter into the land, which I think would prevent the population problem and further damage of flora and fauna. Sundarban is a natural lungs of Kolkata, West Bengal, and Sundarban and Bangladesh. Hence, we must save Sundarban at any cost. So, to stop it, further degradation of natural habitat, first we have to go diagnose the human attitude. We have to educate the permanent settler of the land and give them agro-based, eco-friendly job opportunity, like setting up windmills, tidal wave electricity, solar electricity, etc. A new door of job opportunity can be opened by rainwater harvesting to avoid the usage of highly saline water from river and produce some favorable climatic cash crop like betel leaf, variety of rice, betel nut, etc. Recent research says a huge amount of iron ore deposit under the seabed of Bay of Bengal, and also oil and natural gas are found under the basin of Sundarban. Thus, the character like Jugal Prasad from Aranyok by Bibhushan Bandyopadhyay Aranyok is much needed at this time as a Mashiha of Sundarban. But if the destruction of our green land continues, soon it will be out of green, and inevitably there will be rise of temperature and change of climate, rapid cyclone, and numerous natural climate calamities will be crashed upon here and there, crashed upon there. Will be no tree to prevent its effect, and finally the doomsday is not very far away, when the whole megacity, Kolkata, Bangladesh, etc., will be submerged under the water like Dwarka Nagari. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Haider. I think there was quite a few messages there, and I wonder if when Lord Carnwath goes to COP26, he can pass some on, obviously, about the socio-economic effects of climate change, the effect on biodiversity and the loss of species, which is so tragic, but also kind of more positive message about what's needed in terms of eco-friendly jobs, for example. I should have said, please do feel free to put questions in the chat, and hopefully we're going to have time for them. But now I'd like to turn to my counterpart, our counterpart at the legal clinic in Calcutta, Ankita Chakravarti, who with Tuhin Ghosh has accompanied the students down to the Delta, and then the second part of our survey has taken place in the city. And I'd like Ankita to talk to us about what exactly the students did there and what the findings were and what was the impact of the studies that she did with the students. This is obviously also in our report, but welcome, Ankita. Over to you.
Thank you. So I hope I'm audible. Yeah. Okay. Well, hello everyone. It's a good evening for us in India. So I wish you a very good evening. Thank you for joining in. So I'd like to take a very brief I'd like to take you along on a very brief sort of an revision really of what we did, a very brief perspective on what we did in our field visits really. We had 2 field visits, like Sue said. One was to the Sagar Islands, which is just off the Sundarbans, and the other was to Sonarpur, which is a peri-urban area in and around Calcutta, where we mainly interacted with residents of Goshaba Island who had migrated to Calcutta. And Dr. Paula Shaldar, of course, is also one of the people we had spoken to, and we had asked him to be part of our launch event. In the Sagar Islands, or for our Sagar Islands trip, we took 3 of our students from NUJS, National University of Juridical Sciences, which is where I'm based. And we tried to carry out a pilot survey into the lives of the residents there, some of whom have shifted to their current residences in Sagar Islands from other areas of Sundarbans which have already become submerged or do not exist anymore, and so on. We visited about 3 or 4 localities and migrant settlements. And what emerged really was a very complex narrative. It's very, very difficult to simplify it and sort of put it in within 2 minutes. But what did definitely emerge is that, the vagaries of the overwhelming climatic changes that are happening in and around the Sundarbans over the last few decades, but which have intensified over the last few years, has really meant that the people of Sundarbans, as well as the migrants who have left the major sort of, their areas of origin and so on, and migrated into the cities, either Calcutta or Chennai or Bangalore or Bombay or wherever, they have been rendered extremely vulnerable to, economic impoverishment, to absolute poverty, malnutrition, starvation, just a terrible life situation really. So the quality of life has been severely affected. Either it is majorly due to the farming patterns or cultivation patterns being affected due to, this incessant number of cyclones and storms that we have been having, which have sort of rendered the cultivable land absolutely unusable. So the salinity has increased, and consequently, farming has become extremely unprofitable. So what that has meant is that, there has been a huge number of people who are increasingly migrating. In fact, most of the younger male members that we met in and around these field trips were people who were either migrants during some seasonal period, or were people who had lived outside for a very long period of time. So, that is also affecting the family patterns, right? That is also affecting the marriage relationships. That is also affecting the social structure, really, of the areas, and the communities in the Sundarbans. Of course, on the second field trip that we did to the peri-urban areas, we mainly spoke to people who had already migrated out of the Sundarbans and who were settled in and around Calcutta. So these people had also, the same sort of, narrative really, which was that they were essentially communicating to us the difficulties of living in such a sensitive area where, it's absolutely unpredictable as to what the pattern of the climatic changes and the weather conditions are going to be like, very soon or next, and which renders life very, very unstable for all the people there. While the state government does try to, do as much as it can and so on, it's still quite inconsistent. And it is a much larger issue really than just the state government. It is, as we know, a larger issue of climate change, which is why we are all here, hoping to come up with some concrete steps. Obviously legally, to help the people who are already in that situation of absolute trouble and absolute penury, but also to hopefully do something really material about climate change. Coming to the end of some of the other insights that I would like to share about our trip, really. While it was only a very, very brief visit for all of us, the students, as well as the fact that the facilitators like Tuhin and myself and Ruklina, who was with us all the way. It was also an excellent introduction, I thought, for our students who are all from urban backgrounds to really understand, what they can contribute at the grassroots level. So I think it was an excellent sort of, an opportunity, really, a learning opportunity for not just us, obviously the facilitators and so on, but also the students. And we really tried very, very hard to keep in mind the inevitable power imbalances that result in such a situation when we are the ones who are sort of coming from a privileged background, from an elite background, and engaging in questionnaires and interviews and so on of people who are sort of obviously in much, much more terrible conditions and so on. So we were as cognizant as possible, really, of the limitations of survey methods. We adapted as far as possible a much more free-flowing, freewheeling sort of narrative styles of conversation. And just be careful, really, keep the students on their toes, as well as ourselves, of course, about the fact that we are not here, and hopefully we were not there to be exploitative in any way as we extract information for our research, but also we can, actively contribute in some way, which is where our future plan of, setting up potential legal clinics and pop-up sort of legal aid sort of measures really comes into play. So with that, I would like to end by saying that we hope that this sort of global launch event will actually come to fruition and really do bigger and better things. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankita. At this stage, I'd like to acknowledge Ruklina Parel, who's from Jadavpur. She's a researcher with Professor Ghosh, and she took a very active part in both of the two surveys. So for the surveys, we needed students from the legal clinic connected to NUJS, and we had a team of students who participated, gave up their weekends for joint training, and then we chose some students who we could see were very committed, but were also able to deal sensitively with the ethical issues concerned. And so I'm very pleased to welcome one of those students, Sanjula Chakraborty. And Shanjula, I wanted to ask you about the impact that it had going down to Ghosh Island, going down to the Sundarbans, and then perhaps in the city, interviewing Sundarbans residents. And how do you think that we can raise awareness more generally amongst other law students about climate change and about what's happening there, so that there can be an ongoing relationship, hopefully, between those more privileged students in Calcutta and other students to empower the residents in Sundarbans to change the situation there?
Hello, everyone. Hi, Sue. Thank you for the question. So basically, before I even began the project, I was initially quite nervous with actually how I would be asking these questions, because I felt that the nature of the questions were quite personal and they were quite intrusive. But when I actually went forward to Chagor Island, and on the day of the visit, I felt that I was quite surprised at how freely the people were answering the questions and how open they were about discussing all that we wanted to discuss with them. After interviewing the residents of Chagor Island, I felt that they live a life in which work is really driven by necessity and shaped by natural events which are really out of their control. And what they crave for more than anything is stability in their life, actually, and more opportunities for their youth. Going there made me see the luxury that I have in my life and the stability that I enjoy, because the lack of planning that goes into their future lens directly from the lack of stability that they feel in their everyday lives. With the lives that they live currently, they have to move every 30, 40 years, I think, because the set of respondents that we interviewed in Chagor Island were people whose families had moved 30 to 40 years ago to Chagor because they were relocated by the government there, because the islands that they were living in were sinking because of global warming. So these people can't even imagine a future where they have set down roots anywhere and establish themselves from there. So I feel like that the government should the state government, as has been said by everyone else as well, the state government did do what they could have done, but the aid that has been provided has not been particularly because of global warming or for any of those reasons, but has been provided for all of the other issues such as Isla and all of and other storms and soil salinity issues and everything else that they face. So all of these issues really combine to create a situation where these people cannot live comfortably and can neither flourish. And I think that everyone deserves that chance, right? And these people do as well. Even more than that, the islands themselves are extremely rich in biodiversity and have a pristine environment and are really beautiful, to be honest. And they really deserve to be protected, which is something that the respondents, especially those who have moved away from the Sundarbans and now live in the cities, they fondly remember their hometowns and they insist again and again the importance of protecting the Sundarbans. As for how interaction can be facilitated between students and those actually in need, the first step, I think the most important step I think that should be taken is direct interaction between people, because of course when you hear the issues directly from those who are facing the problems, you understand the impact that it has on the people. So at the end of the day, I think direct interaction is the first step forward. And for those who do not have the opportunity to directly interact with the people, I think projects such as these and reports such as these, which are created by analyzing data and studying different subjects in order to create a more holistic idea of what the situation is something equally important. So in that scenario, I feel combining both of these aspects would lead a long way. For those who are actually interested in this area of work, they should definitely think about applying for this project, as it would be a great step forward in helping the Sundarbans, as well as I think it might help some people find their passion. And as has already been discussed in this project before as well, pop-up legal clinics and pop-up legal clinics are something which have been envisioned already. Even apart from that, students can always offer the assistance through the legal aid clinics to those who are actually in need. More than that, people who want to know more about these subjects can always read more, and apart from that as well, holding of seminars and workshops is something which is very important in my opinion, to spread awareness about these issues and let people know what is the condition that a lot of other people face that they can't even imagine. So I would like to end with that.
Thank you, Sanjula, for speaking so articulately. I'm sure you've inspired some other students to get involved at NUJS with the kind of work that you've been doing. And at King's, we've had some students who are doing research into possible soft law complaints under something called the OECD process. So I'd like to thank those students who have been working sort of under guidance of Emily and Krishnendu. But now we are going to hear from an academic Emily Barrett. Her background is in access to environmental justice. She's just published recently a book about the Aarhus Convention, which provides access, or in theory provides access to justice in the West, although the book explains how it's not really happening here so well either. But I wanted Emily to talk about her view about access to climate justice, environmental justice, however we describe it, for residents in the Sundarbans, in contrast to other people affected by the climate crisis and environmental degradation in different parts of the world.
Thank you, Sue, and good afternoon and good evening to everybody. It's so nice to see so many people participating. So yes, Sue, one of my research interests is the Aarhus Convention, and the Aarhus Convention is informed by a principle or an idea in international environmental law that says environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens. That means that top-down environmental decision-making is simply not appropriate as a form of decision-making and as a form of access to environmental justice, because it doesn't always pay attention to the actual needs of the communities involved. And so this commitment, which is found in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration, is a commitment that informs this project and represents, I think, one of the core values that we as a team hope to hold and promote in what we're doing. And each of us as legal academics and students and legal practitioners recognize that we have a particular privilege generally in the world, and with this privilege comes certain responsibilities. And one responsibility that we each feel very strongly is a commitment to climate and environmental justice. And through this project, therefore, as you've heard from all the other participants, we really want to draw attention to those community members in the Sundarbans. And these are people who are very much on the front line of climate change. But in holding this commitment, we are very conscious of the fact that some interventions of this nature, many access to justice interventions, can be very top-down, can be very paternalistic, and don't necessarily pay attention to the voices and values of the people involved. So throughout the project, we are actively committed to involving the community of the Sundarbans. That it's not simply a form of an intervention that makes us feel better, that makes us feel less guilty about the privileged lives that we lead, but it is an intervention that is meaningful. And this is particularly important from the perspective of Sue and I in the UK, because there is a colonial past and there are colonial wrongs that our country has been involved with, and that have had lasting impacts, particularly in relation to the environment and climate justice. So we are deeply committed within the project to taking a decolonial approach. And this means a number of things that may be frustrating for those of us who can be quite gung-ho and want to just get on with doing things as we think is best. It actually means us taking steps back, to tread slowly and carefully, to build relationships, to actually listen and pay attention to the needs and values of the community in the Sundarbans, and not to behave or act in a formalistic way. We have ideas. We have ideas about an OECD complaint. We have ideas about other forms of soft law remedy in order to achieve access to justice. But before we even embark on that, we need to make sure that those remedies are appropriate remedies for the community involved. And we're very, very fortunate that Professor Ghosh is part of our project. He has spent many years cultivating his relationships in the Sundarbans. We're also very fortunate to have Rapina Perel, who has just begun her career, I think, in working in the Sundarbans. But we also, we need to build other relationships. And so I just want to finish my contribution to this panel with an open invitation. And there are very many of you here in this discussion. We're grateful that you've taken the time listen to us, but if you have particular relationships or connections to the Sundarbans or experience in the Sundarbans, we would really like to hear from you. So please do get in contact with any of the members on the team. You should be able to find our email addresses on the website, because we are serious about ensuring that we are decolonial in our approach and that we are consultative in our approach. And we recognize that we may not always get this right. So we hope that you will help hold us accountable to this commitment, because access to justice is not simply kind of an easy legal formula that we can input. We really are serious about being consultative in our approach. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening and participating today.
Thank you, Emily. So we've had a couple of questions about the role of the community, and Krishnendu's answered, but Professor Ghosh, I don't know if you want to come in. People are talking about what can the community do, and I suppose also what can we support the community to do, given the enormous challenges that they face, both from the local environmental issues and the wider climate-related issues. Have you got any thoughts on that, and I'm sure what they're already doing?
Yeah, thank you, Sue. What I can tell you that whenever in the history, whenever we have seen that the Indian part of Sundarban was being reclaimed by the people during the British period, that time the local people in the periphery of the Sundarban was not keen to get inside the forest and clear the forest and to make it ready for agriculture practices. Okay, so the people were brought from the Chotanagpur plateau area where there are a lot of forest and with tiger. So they were landless and they started reclaiming the land part of the Sundarban, Indian Sundarban part. So the community, the first community was the tribes from the other states. Now it's in the part of Bihar and Jharkhand. Okay, so they started the journey in Sundarban, and later on, if you consider the river Matla, the western part was gradually being inhabited by the other coast, the Medinipur area, and the eastern part being inhabited by the Bangladeshi people after the partition and the independence of Bangladesh. So this is the situation. So the community is mostly dominated by in the western part by the Medinipur people or Orissa people, and in the eastern part, Bangladesh people. So they have different culture, different practices, and all they have dependent on the ecosystem services or the natural resources of the delta. They had nothing to do else. Okay, so the nature or the practice for extracting or exploiting the natural resources from the forest was obvious. It was not really, we cannot blame for them for that. So it was obvious they collected the natural resources from the forest and fed them. So that was the obvious thing. And these ecosystem services, due to the overpopulation and other climatic factors and for the pollution and all other factors, interventions, is being depleted. So the people, the community is basically from the day one, they were in the competition to bring a lot of resources for their individual consumption. And that's why community was not much wise to do the better practice for exploiting the things. For example, I can tell you, they are now using the nets for catching fish. That is really very low mesh size, which is destroying the juvenile fishes. Okay, so they are destroying the next generation fish to get more catch, and they are really destroying the things. So this is the competition and aspiration of the people. Very few people, very low percentage of people are really very much concerned about that, about the ecosystem. And people are always talking about this ecosystem as terrestrial ecosystem. But in fact, this is one of the most important aquatic ecosystem. So people are always trying to get the resources and adapt with the practices. There is no such concerned effort to restore, to preserve, to conserve the ecosystem is seen, except few cases, few exceptional cases. So that much I can tell you at this moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh. I think we have, the one thing we have learned is the complexity of the challenges and the depth of the challenges that face us, and so many links to colonialism have come up along the way. But Justice Loco has listened to us very patiently. We're very honoured to have him. People will know him from his work in the Indian Supreme Court in relation to issues such as air pollution caused by stubble burning, and he's now in the Fijian Supreme Court. So I'm keen that we move on to listen to his reflections on how courts and lawyers can intervene in these kind of challenging situations. Thank you very much for joining us, Justice Loco.
Yeah, thank you, Sue, and good evening to everybody who's here. It's actually, the problems in the Sundarbans are quite an eye-opener. I was aware that there are problems, but when I went into depth, I realized that it's an extremely serious problem. And the discussion today has highlighted the magnitude of the problem. And surely something has to be done about it. I'd like to just go back a little bit about the role of the courts in environmental litigation and environmental jurisprudence. India was among the first few countries to enact a law after the Stockholm Conference. And there was a lot of initial enthusiasm. We had an Air Pollution Act, we had a Water Pollution Act, we had a Wildlife Protection Act, we had an Environment Protection Act. And that enthusiasm continued, for maybe about a decade or so. We had a couple of judges in the Supreme Court who were quite interested in protection of the environment and environmental issues. And thanks to their efforts, something called the Green Bench was set up in the Supreme Court. So the work of the Green Bench lasted while the judges were there, and maybe a couple of years after that. But then, the involvement of the Green Bench kind of diminished in the sense that environmental issues took a bit of a backseat, in spite of the fact that some very, very important judgments had been delivered by our Supreme Court towards environmental jurisprudence and environmental law, including air pollution and various other areas. Towards say about 2016, 2017, I spoke to the Chief Justice and I requested him to try and revive the Green Bench. And fortunately, he agreed with me and put me in charge of the Green Bench. Now, this is not to say that, environmental issues, even though they may have been on the back burner, so far as the Supreme Court is concerned, it's not that, they were completely neglected, because Parliament enacted the National Green Tribunal. So a lot of the cases that were pending in different parts of the country got shifted to the National Green Tribunal. And they've been doing some excellent work over the years. It's been now, I think, about 8 or 9 years they've been there. They've been doing some excellent work, but they don't have the kind of heft, that a judgment of the Supreme Court would have, or the Supreme Court itself would have. So I would say that one of the things that has to be done is that the courts in India, whether it is the Supreme Court and whether it's the high courts, they all need to get into the act and realize that environmental issues, climate change, water pollution, air pollution, wildlife, the works need attention. And I'm sorry to say that that's not been happening, and we have to try and reinvigorate the courts, the constitutional courts, into taking greater interest in environmental issues. A few words about the experience that I had on the green bench. There are two things which I think are extremely important, and perhaps that could be a way to move forward for the legal clinic and for all those looking at a solution through the courts. One is solid research material, right? And I can see today that there is more than enough research material that is available. I had occasion to deal with cases pertaining to mining. It could be mining of iron, it could be mining of bauxite, it could be mining of coal. There was a lot of work that had been done to indicate that these mining activities created a huge environmental problem. So that's one aspect, that is the research and the impact that the activity has on the environment. Similarly, on issues of air pollution, we had a problem of stubble burning. This is around this time of the year, November, where you would have thousands and thousands of fires in different parts of North India, where the farmers would be burning stubble. You have the Diwali festival, where there would be firecrackers. You would have people visiting others. So there'd be a lot of movement of cars. All this contributed to the air pollution, and things were really bad. So far as the air pollution in Delhi is concerned, we were living that air pollution. But so far as mining is concerned in different parts of the country, it's the people over there who were, living the problem, not the courts, not anybody else. So to highlight the focus, to highlight the problem, it's not only the research in terms of material, it's not only the impact that the activity has, but also the impact that it has on humans. That is important, right? So air pollution in Delhi, we breathe the air. I know, and all the judges know, everybody in Delhi knows what is the impact of it. So far as mining is concerned, that's an example I'm giving, but I could give you many more. So far as mining is concerned, what is the impact of coal dust on the people? What is the impact on the lives of people who, where there's bauxite mining or where there's iron mining, the degradation of the forest and so on. Many of them are forest dwellers. What is the impact that it has on the people? So here, so far as the Sundarbans is concerned, there is enough material that is available in terms of the impact on the people. Not only the people who are staying there, but the climate refugees, the refugees from the Sundarbans who are in Calcutta, right? Or in other places. Living in a one-room, tenement, trying to eke out a living. How good is that? Or how bad is that? So it's really a matter of, life, a life of dignity. They would be free if there wasn't all this problem in the Sundarbans. But now, because of climate change, because of cyclone Ayla and various other factors, salinity, destruction of flora, fauna, marine life, the works, it has had an adverse impact on the people. So it has to be, if I may venture to suggest, that if we are talking about climate justice for the people in the Sundarbans, it has to be a combination of three things. One, research, of which there is plenty. Second, the impact that it has on the people over there, the flora, the fauna. And third, what is happening? You know, it's not only the people who are living there, but the people who have left from that area and who have been forced to leave. It's not as if they, voluntarily left, but they were forced to leave. So really, one has to look at the problem in a larger perspective, in a much larger perspective. And it's only then that we can, think of getting justice for these people. They don't have access to the courts. They don't have access to the National Green Tribunal. It is you and others who have access to the courts, who have access to the National Green Tribunal. And I'm sure even if somebody in some court in Calcutta High Court is not interested in the environment, fine, it doesn't matter. But you will not find a judge who is not interested in human problems. So once you have this combination, I think it will work magic, not only in the National Green Tribunal, which looks at environmental issues, may not be looking at human issues. The Calcutta High Court, which looks at human issues, may not be looking at environmental issues. But once you have a combination of both, I have no doubt that you will succeed in whatever your aim is for the betterment of the Sundarbans and for the people of Sundarbans, both in the National Green Tribunal as well as the Calcutta High Court. So there are avenues available to you. There is material available to you. There is research available to you. There are problems that you know of and which you can put across. And I'm sure with the assistance of the legal clinic, with the assistance of legal aid lawyers and with others, community support, you're bound to succeed. So I think, we have to be optimistic about this and get moving. There's no point in waiting for another 12 years. But perhaps the Sundarbans may not exist after 12 years, one doesn't know. But we have to start right now. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you so much, Justice Looker. A message of hope is definitely what we need to end on, but also those insights. We actually were surprised that the research we had expected wasn't there, and that the communities didn't even have the language of climate change in understanding what was happening around them. We couldn't go and ask a question about climate change, even with the best interpreters, because that awareness was not yet there. And obviously we don't have the answers to the questions even that have been raised in the chat today. We're exploring this, but we just hope that we can make a very small contribution. We hope that the people who've attended this meeting, the judges, Mr. Halder, we hope that you may be there in the background as we move slowly along our path, and that this message will get across, perhaps through Lord Carnwath, to COP26, of the responsibility that we bear from our colonial history, from the way that we live our lives now, to try to have an impact when we know that this is happening in front of our eyes. Thank you very much to everyone who's attended. Thank you to the people in the background who've helped to organise the event, and the researcher, Malavika. Can we conclude with anything concrete? I think we can conclude with we are working to raise awareness, and we hope that some of you will get in touch and start this kind of journey with us to try to bring access to climate justice, access to justice. I think that's the best that we can do to work towards a kind of fairer, more just system, using our skills as lawyers and collaborating with environmentalists. Lord Carnwath, I don't know if you had any final thoughts that you would like to add.
No, thank you, Sue. I find it a very interesting study of the problem, and I was very encouraged by Justice Luco's contribution. And if I get a chance to spread the message when my visit to Glasgow later in the week, I'll do so. So thank you all very much and best of luck.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. And yeah, feel free to contact us, whether you're in India through the NUJS or through the legal clinic in London. And yeah, let's get on with it, as Justice Lokur said. Thank you very much to all our speakers. Bye-bye.